Well, good news is for sharing, and here was an opportunity in the Old Testament. Oftentimes we maybe skip over different sections. Maybe they get a little long, a little tedious. We don't understand what's going on. And so I just want to dwell a little bit in this event that happened many, many years ago with the people of Israel. So this is the northern kingdom, and they were living in the area of Samaria. And they didn't always do what was right. And that's kind of the understatement of the year, right? They were kind of always challenged of trying to keep on track with what God wanted them to do. They were easily distracted and easily got involved in the things of the world and worshiping and the pagan altars and the temples and all that kind of thing instead of listening to God and following His law. Sometimes they got involved in immorality and doing evil things, wicked things, not even caring for each other. And so God had said earlier, even through the law of Moses, that when you live that way in rebellion to God and kind of wicked towards your fellow neighbor, there's going to be a judgment. And sometimes that judgment was famine. And sometimes that judgment was war. And they would end up in slavery. Well, this is an event where it was both famine and war. So in the previous chapter, we see that the king of Aram decided that he was going to siege the city where the people were living. And so it was probably a walled city, so they didn't want to go in and fight because you lose too many people. So they would just surround the city. This is kind of the way they did it back then, sometimes in warfare. Just surround the city and didn't let anybody in or out. And after a while, what happens? Well, you run out of food. And when you run out of food, you either surrender or you die. And at this point, they decided they're not going to surrender. And I'm guessing Elisha at this point is telling the people, just wait, God's going to deliver us. He's going to come through. But boy, it just seemed like a long time. And things were getting really desperate. So in the previous chapter, chapter 6 and 7, we find out that the people are really struggling. As a matter of fact, it talks there that they really are out of food. And it talks about that even a donkey's head would be sold probably in our economy for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So that's like to make donkey head stew, right? You ever had that? Did they ever show that on cooking channels, kind of like, let's make this. It's a delicate, no, but it just shows that they had so little food. And they the other thing that kind of says, depending on what translation you use, the newer translation says, like, little seeds would be sold for hundreds of dollars, but the older translation doesn't call it seeds. It calls it dove droppings. So we're so desperate for food, we're going to spend hundreds of dollars to get bird poop. Can I say that in church? Okay, it's close to that in the Bible. It's the newer translation. But, I mean, talking about desperation. But it gets even worse than that. Because just outside the city gate, we've got some lepers. So guess what? They're not eating, and they're not able to talk to anybody except themselves. And they've got leprosy. They can't even go in the city because they would be rejected. That's why they're kind of outcasts. You remember the lepers, they had this infectious disease that ate away at your body and eventually killed you, so you don't really want to go in and give that to everybody. So they would be isolated. And so they're on the outside of the city. And generally, when things are going well, maybe the people from inside the city, what they do with their leftovers, because not very many of them had refrigerators, the plug-in kind, back then. So they couldn't keep leftovers, so they probably throw them over the wall and let the lepers and the poor people eat leftovers, which is better than not eating at all. But there's no leftovers coming over the wall. So here they are starving, they're lepers. They kind of reason in their mind, well, we can't go in the city because we're really not going to be welcome there, and they don't have any food anyway. And if we just sit here, we're going to die because we got no food. So let's go to the king of Aram, the Armenians, and say, we surrender. And maybe, only maybe, they would find compassion. Maybe they would figure, well, maybe we could become slaves. Or maybe they have leftovers they can throw to us. But either way, we're going to die. And so maybe we'll just go there. If we die, we die. But if we stay here, we're going to die anyway. So this initial thing that they did was not necessarily, oh, they're great men of faith. They trust in God. They're just desperate. And the interesting thing is sometimes when people are just really desperate, sometimes they do desperate things. But, God can still work through it, can't he? And that's what we're going to find out in this lesson. God still works. These are the people of God. Maybe they don't trust him as much as they should. Maybe they're not really praying about their decisions. But because they're doing something, they're seeking for life, God's saying, I'm going to bless you anyway. And that's what was going to happen. So you can imagine how long they were in this situation of being locked up in their city, not able to come and go and not able to get food. I mean, they're definitely out of food. So it may have been months or even years sometimes it takes that long. But you know what? Kind of a side story, what happens in the city, the king of Samaria, of God's people, finally said, where's that Elijah? Well, Elisha, it's all his fault. It's Elisha's fault that there's this famine and then there's this army. How's that Elisha's fault? Elisha's the one who's been warning them and teaching them and trying to turn them back towards God so they can be blessed. And all of a sudden, we're going to start, blaming the church. We're going to start blaming the preacher. We're going to start blaming the people that, follow God. And you know what Elisha says? He says, by this time tomorrow, there's going to be such an abundance. There's going to be food everywhere. There's going to be so much food, you're not going to know what to do with it all. I mean, you're pretty well just going to be able to give it away. And of course, nobody really understood what that meant. Now, one guy did have something to say about that. And this maybe was an advisor to the king and says he was kind of leaning on his arm and he just kind of said, like, even if God opened up the windows of heaven, how would that work? Like, God can't do that. How's that going to happen? Explain the process. But the funny thing is with Elisha, people knew he was a man of God. People knew that he could speak for God. And somehow he was very aware of what was going on. Kind of in the next chapter, he even knows that the king of Aram's going to die and he's going to be replaced by another man. So he's able, through God, to describe what's going to be happening even in the future. And he's even able to describe what's going to happen in people's minds and kind of what their motives are. So he's been doing that the whole time, and all of a sudden it's like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This Elijah, he's just making stuff up. But it does seem kind of a long stretch, doesn't it? How is this ever going to happen? And Elisha does say something to that man. He says, it's going to happen next day, tomorrow. Within 24 hours, this is going to happen. About this time tomorrow. It's going to happen just like I said. And you're going to be able to see it. But you're not eating anything. How's that going to work out? Right? What does that mean? Well, we're going to find out as we kind of look at this next chapter of what these lepers did now, kind of as things changed. There were 4 men. They were lepers at the entrance of the gate, so they couldn't go in, but they were on the outside of the gate. And they said to one another, why just sit here until we die? Let's go to the city. Let's go to the Armenians. We can't go into our city because we'll die there. If we sit here, we'll die. Let's go over to the camp of the Syrians, the Armenians. Let's go there. Maybe they'll have mercy. Maybe they'll have grace. Maybe they'll provide us at least with some food that may keep us going for another while anyway. So what happened is they went there, but God had already done a work. He'd already provided a way. And it wasn't just for them. It was kind of, we would say it's really like salvation for everybody. So they walked towards the city, and as they were approaching, it's kind of like, it seems pretty vague. I don't even hear anybody in there talking. I don't hear any, yelling. I don't hear any noise. Like, that's just, it sounds like a ghost town. I just don't hear a thing. So as they got closer and closer, they realized there's nobody here. And even they were reluctant. Maybe they're hiding somewhere, ready to kill us. And it's kind of like, you really think the Armenians are scared of 4 lepers that are almost starving to death? They probably don't have any energy left, and that somehow they've got to hide from them and ambush them or something like that. It's like, this is a pretty powerful army. But they kept walking in and looking around, and there's nobody in town. Everybody had left. And what the Bible says is that God created a great noise that the people inside the city of the Armenians, they thought the people of Israel had hired Egypt and some of the other nations and their armies, and they're all coming now to fight against the Syrians. So they thought, we're going to flee, we're going to run, you're going to leave everything behind. And so when these lepers came to the city, it was empty, but there was lots of food. There was lots of gold and silver, because these people just left. They ran for their lives. They didn't have time to pack. They didn't have time to bring all their food. So it was like an abundance. So here it's going through the city from house to house. Lots of food, lots of dessert, lots of gold and silver. And they took some, even the gold and silver, and went and hid it, thinking maybe the Armenians are coming back soon. But they got to enjoy it. And you can imagine the gladness and just how they were feeling. Like there's a great provision here. But this is kind of where we get to. See, then they were saying to one another, this is great. We're enjoying it. Plenty to eat. Unlike anything we've ever really seen before. What a great opportunity. But they said to themselves, we're not doing right. This is not the right thing to do, just to keep it all for ourselves. To enjoy it all for ourselves. When the people back in our city, our people, our families, our friends, they're starving. And they don't even know about this. They don't know about the opportunity. This is the day of good news. If we're silent and wait until morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now therefore come, let us go to the king's household. So they decide to go back and share this news so that people could come and enjoy the festivities. They could enjoy a feast. They could enjoy all that this city has to offer. It's all free. It's all available. It's all ready. But somehow in their heart, they knew the right thing to do is to share this with other people. Now, to a certain extent, maybe that was a little bit challenging, right? Because I'm sure them being lepers and understanding that the Israelites were not really that kind to people that had needs and things like that, because they were very selfish, very thinking about themselves. I don't know if those people really deserve it. I mean, look how they treated us when we were lepers. You know, what did they do? They didn't even come visit us. You know, and they only gave us their scraps. But they didn't think that. They thought, we've got to share this with them. We've got to go back and tell it, because this is the day of good news. And so that's what they decided to do. We're going back to share this with our people. Because to do otherwise is not right. To do otherwise would bring us into judgment. To do otherwise, they felt was like really immoral. Because they didn't deserve this. They didn't earn this. They kind of just fell upon this opportunity, the opportunity of a lifetime. So they went back. The king rose at night when these people came. The lepers came, told them what was going on. And this is what the king said. I tell you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we're hungry, therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the open country, thinking when they come out of their city, we will go and take them alive and get into the city. So what the king is saying, this is a trap. Now, I don't know if he forgot what Elisha had said, you know, because this is kind of like, to us, it's like, hang on, this is the answer. Because Elisha said, within 24 hours, you're going to have an abundance of food. Now, there's an abundance of food there. Obviously, we're not going to get abundance of food here unless it literally rains food from heaven, which God could do. He did that with Moses. But he said, this is a trick. This is a trap. I'm not falling for it. So, lacking faith, they don't trust God. They don't think that this is real. They think this is a trap. And this is what happens when people sometimes doubt. So, you know, let's say, you know, you're talking about believing in God, about your faith, about the promises of the future, that God is going to give you, his blessing, and he's going to give you strength and wisdom, and he's going to help you through difficult times. And that's what these lepers are saying. Look what God's done. This is just so wonderful. And yet, a lot of people that are not of faith, they say, no, it can't be that easy. There's something else. There's got to be some kind of a trick. I'm not falling for it. I don't believe it. This can't be God. And we have to be prepared that sometimes that's the response, isn't it? Just because we believe and we've enjoyed a blessing from God, maybe even enjoyed salvation, and trying to explain that to someone else, they kind of look at us and go, well, that can't be, or that's really weird, or that's impossible, or that's not for me. And it's kind of like, so you really just want to stay in your own city and starve to death? Like you're really close to, having the last crumbs of bread. This is something that God has provided. But didn't want to believe it. Too much doubt. So the king appointed a captain on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. The people trampled him in the gate so that he died, as the man of God had said the king when he came down. So you remember at the beginning, this was the guy that said, even if God opens up heavens, could this ever really? God can't do this. He's not strong enough. So what happened to him is he heard about the good news. He heard that there was the city there with all the food. And as all the people were running to get the food, they kind of ran over him because he was at the gate. Probably, we might say wrong place, wrong time. But he was trampled over when everybody was so excited about going to get food. Now, we know that can even happen in our day, right? At Black Friday sales, it's not uncommon for some people to be trampled, not necessarily always die, but hopefully not. But it happens. And this is what happened to him. Now, Elisha did not make that happen. Elisha was a prophet. He knew what the future was going to hold. So he knew that this was going to happen for somebody that doubted in God, that he ended up dying without God. Now, if he was a believer, this may have never happened, and he may have been able to participate in the food and in life and in the future of what God had, even for the nation and for him individually and for his family. So we get to the New Testament, kind of making an application about good news. When we've received some good news of something we could share, something that may help other people in their life. And you think about the good news that we've received as Christians, about the peace that we can have in God, or the joy we have, or the love, or we have a changed life, or that we've been able to overcome some of our struggles and our problems, and even some of the other problems and struggles that we still have, that we're still working through, that God is still helping us with that. And we realize there's been a big change in our life. And then when we think about our future, we're not thinking about despair. We're thinking about, something even more beautiful than we have now. That we're thinking about, a place in heaven where it's all going to be perfect, where we're going to be with God forever. Like, that's just a wonderful thing to think about, of these blessings we've received from the Lord. And so Peter and John, when they were told, don't you be preaching in Jesus anymore. You're just making up too much of problems. You're causing a lot of division. You're creating unrest in the city. Because a lot of our Jewish people, this is when they were still in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a really Jewish city. And some of these Jewish people were becoming Christians. He said, quit preaching about Jesus. And also, if you are going to be preaching about Jesus, quit talking about this resurrection. And if you're going to talk about Jesus and talk about him being crucified, quit putting it on us, making it sound like we're the ones responsible for having him killed. Oh, yeah, you were. I don't know if they said that. But it was true, They were responsible. And, the interesting thing is, even earlier, they kind of said to Pilate, right? When Pilate said, I find no reason. And they said, let his blood be upon us. We'll take full responsibility for his death. And now it's like, why are you going around Jerusalem preaching that it was our idea to have Jesus killed on the cross? But they disliked Peter and John. And the other apostles were preaching as well, but maybe these two were kind of the people that spoke publicly. So they said in response when they were told, don't you be preaching anymore, don't be talking about this, don't be telling the good news about Jesus, they said whether it's right in the sight of God to listen to you rather than to God. Like in other words, if they just said, we put it this way, and it's saying it to a religious person, you can't really say this to like an atheist, but do you think it's right if God told us to do this that we would refuse to do it? I mean, if you're a godly person, you say, well, if God told you to do it, who am I to say, stop it, right? So whether you think it's right or not, God's told us to do it, we're going to do it, and you would even agree if God told us to do it, we ought to be doing it because we're trying to follow God. That's all they're saying. God's told us to do it. So you judge whether it's right or not for us to follow God. We cannot but speak of what we have seen and heard. How can we keep this quiet? We've witnessed it, and we've even personally had a changed life. And we've seen Jesus and heard his promises that he ascended and went back to heaven to prepare a place for us. He said he's going to send the Holy Spirit to work in our lives, to guide us into truth and to give us power over sin and Satan. We can conquer. So why wouldn't we keep quiet about that? Just keep it to ourselves? That we'll just have a nice little Bible study in our own house and not share it with anybody else? Because there's a lot of people that are seeking life. They're seeking hope. They're seeking something to eat. So back in the day of 2 Kings, they were starving to death. But today in America, I know there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people in my neighborhood that are starving to death. Oh, they have lots of food. But they're starving for a relationship. They're starving for meaning. They're starving for help to overcome some of their fears or some of their addictions or some of their relational problems that they know they're contributing towards it. Trying to figure things out. They're starving for direction. They're starving for help. They're striving and starving for wisdom. And so we got the answer to that. Now, I don't have answers to all their problems, but I know who does. I can just point them to Jesus. I can say, let's study the Bible. You know, why don't you become a Christian and follow God? Because he wants the best for you. And he's going to give you the Spirit to help you through this. I mean, because you want to know something, to be honest, it doesn't always work out. Like every Christian that gets cancer does not necessarily get healed. Every Christian who has a conflict in their family doesn't always have reconciliation. Every Christian that, maybe works hard on their job, it doesn't mean you may not get laid off or even get fired, right? But we know that God is always with us no matter what happens. So we trust in him. We say, God, if this doesn't work out for whatever reason, I'm going to try to do the best and be the person you've called me to be. But if it doesn't work out, you've got something else. You've got something in my future that you are going to be with me, whatever that would be. And I don't always know what the answer to that is, but we've got this idea of sharing something. As a matter of fact, this is what Jesus said about bread, right? Because ultimately, even when Jesus talks about bread, he's not really just talking about bread, right? Because if I said, you know what we're having for lunch today? It's bread. Now, the first thing you're going to say is, what are you putting on it? I mean, you can put cheese, we can make grilled cheese. Or we can make a sub, and that will be good. Or whatever it is, but just having bread. I mean, we can even dip it in the eggs and have French toast. Do something, but just bread. Like without even any butter, that doesn't sound too good. But when he says bread, he's talking about what we need for nourishment, right, in our life. Like the bread of life just means anything that we eat that sustains us, that gives us energy, that gives us what we need to go from day to day or even sometimes moment to moment. So Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He is the bread of life. And whoever comes to Jesus will not hunger. And he who believes in Jesus will never thirst. And so he's using the bread as a metaphor. He's not saying you're always going to have all the food you want. He's maybe not even saying you're always going to have all the food you need. But he is saying, I'm going to give you what you really need. And that's eternal life. That's life on the inside. Now, does God take care of us? Yeah, he does. Does God bless us, with the food? Like Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Even the birds, they don't worry about what they're going to eat. God provides for the birds. And he's saying, you're much more important than birds. You're more loved than the birds. God cares about you so much. Jesus never died for the birds, but they get enough to eat. So he's going to provide for us. But the most important part is this bread. It lasts forever. It sustains us forever. The bread of life. So we've received the bread that comes from Jesus. And just like the lepers who found the bread in the city, they said we can go out and share that with people. Now, will they listen? Will they believe? Will they decide to come out and get the bread? Will they have too many fears or concerns, or we think this is a trap? Or, there's all kinds of reasons why people say, well, it just sounds too good to be true. Or I just don't believe in all of that stuff. Or I'm still just chasing after all the stuff that I can find, because somehow in my heart and maybe even in my palate, I've learned to really enjoy donkey head soup. It's like one of my favorites now. Yeah, no, people are eventually going to see there's got to be more than this. There's got to be a plan that God has. So just like Elisha had promised, within 24 hours, you're going to have so much food, so much abundance that your life is going to be full. And that's what Jesus said. I've come that you could have life full, that your hearts can be full, that your soul can be full. And you can not just live, because we all know there's so many people, even in America, that they have an abundance of food, but they're miserable, right? Because, you can eat all you want, and so you're healthy. You still go to the gym, and you still get your exercise, and you still eat, and, you go to the doctor, and you got a clean bill of health. Does that make you happy? Does that give you peace? Does that help you in your relationships? No, not really, right? There's more than just the physical, but there's the spiritual, and that's what Jesus came. He's the bread of life, and he wants to give us the bread of life. And when we receive that, and especially after we've been tasting and eating, we've gone to a couple of houses and we've eaten off the tables, and we've seen the silver and the gold and all that stuff, and eventually at some point we say, I got to share this with somebody. I got to tell, there's some people around me that they're just starving, and they need to hear that there's good news. We've got an obligation to go out and share good news with people. And the good news that we have, it may not be financial. We may not have a lot of money to give away. Or we may not have a lot of energy that we can go actually help people, build something or, take care of a problem that they have. But we can always share the love of God and the grace that we have through Christ, the salvation and the promises that we have, so that they too can enjoy eternal life. And they can become a follower, and then they can share with other people as well. We're going to sing a song, I Bring My Sins to Thee. And it's just about saying, I'm going to come to Christ, and I'm going to allow him to take my sin away. Take away all the bad things of my life. And help me that I can live a better life. But the real idea I better get some water. And then, all right, I'm good for another half hour. That doesn't happen very often, but I know it does once in a while. My throat dries out. It's kind of hard to talk when your throat's dry. But Jesus is the living water, so that's good. But today, if you want to make a decision to follow Christ, we always give that opportunity. The bread of life, purpose of life, the future. And if you're ready to be baptized into Christ today, which means surrendering your life, saying you want to live for him and have him live in you so that you can be a blessing to others. Let's stand and sing. Let us know how we can be a blessing to you today.